Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Eric Heinze, who's here to share with us his new book, Coming Clean: The Rise of Critical Theory and the Future of the Left. So has critical theory helped or hurt the future of the left in politics? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Eric Heinze, Professor of Law and Humanities at Queen Mary University of London, is a distinguished intellectual with a deep background in law, political theory, and human rights. He provides a nuanced and research-driven perspective, bridging the gap between extreme voices in contemporary political debates. Heinze's commitment to critical thinking and refusal to align with strict ideologies offer a pragmatic alternative to polarized narratives, promoting inclusive and constructive dialogue for the future of the centrist left thought. His work has been featured in The Guardian, Times Higher Ed, The Irish Times, and many other publications. So welcome to the show, Eric Heinze.
Hi, Marianne. It's a pleasure to be with you.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this new book. So I have to ask, what inspired you to write this?
What inspired me to write it, in some ways, is easier to understand now that I've already written it than when I was writing it. And why? Because, of course, of the presidential election last November and Trump's re-election to the presidency. Because what this has sparked has been a whole new wave of discussion about where progressive thinking has gone wrong, right? Certainly the Democratic Party is asking it, but more generally, people on the left, people who consider themselves progressive, have been asking themselves and each other, where did we go wrong? And that's something that I've been thinking about. Of course, I'm not the only one, but I think I have my own take on it, and that's what the book is about.
Well, that seems to be an ever-changing landscape here with
Yeah.
what has been happening. So when you were writing this book, were there many changes that happened as just history is taking place right now?
Well, yeah. And again, the recent election of Trump above all, which I guess happened just as I was putting the final touches on the book. Because you see, I think the problem is that the discussions are still far too superficial. If you listen to a lot of the debate, it's about, well, should the Democrats be putting a little less emphasis on this issue and a little more emphasis on that issue? It's often discussed as if just a little tweaking would have completely changed all the results. Right? 5 minutes less on one issue and 5 minutes more on one issue would have meant that Kamala Harris would have swept into the White House, with a full congressional victory. And I just think this is not the way to look at it. I think a lot of the problems, they run much deeper, and then they go back way before we even knew about Kamala Harris. And I think that's really what we have to look at. I don't think anything is going to change if we're only trying to tweak the message at the edges.
So why do you think the left has been so reluctant to scrutinize its own past as a part of the West history?
Because I think people on the left genuinely believe that they don't make this mistake. If you talk to people on the left, and of course, in academia, they're not hard to find, people on the left and also with very strident progressive views, genuinely believe that they do self-scrutinize. They genuinely believe that they do examine, things that the left has done wrong, ways in which the left has affiliated itself with dictatorial or oppressive regimes. But I don't really think, I think if you look closely, this is just kind of self-delusion, unfortunately. As sincerely as many may think that they do this, we just don't see it happening. You see, when the left, and again, I think there's no better, showcase for this than academic circles. When the left thinks something needs to be scrutinized, we hear about it and we see it, right? And so I think progressives have been entirely right for decades now to look at the ways in which Western capitalism has been very exploitative, or ways in which racism has taken place, or colonialism and sexism and oppression of LGBTQ plus people, and so on. Right? We just have to look at university campuses day in and day out, going over decades, and the left has always been very vocal about these issues. So we know when the left wants to scrutinize something, it's not a secret, and certainly not on university campuses. And yet, we don't see anything like that same level of self-scrutiny when we look at, this long-standing problem of the left making different kinds of allegiances, expressing support for, lending legitimacy to regimes which also have been responsible for damaging hundreds of millions of lives.
In your book, you share that we need not less woke, but more woke. Can you
Yeah,
kind of explain that for us?
yeah, and well, this is it, right? In other words, we know the kind of conventional conservative critique of the left now, right? It's trying to put into question the very enterprise of challenging the histories of capitalism, or challenging the histories of racism or colonialism or sexism or LGBTQ plus oppression and so forth, trying to suggest in a sense that these are not types of scrutiny that need to take place at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not telling the left to stop looking at those issues. Those issues have been important. If you care about justice and injustice, there's no way you can ignore them. And so that hasn't been the problem. So when I say that we need not less woke, but a different kind of woke, um, uh, that's my point. My point is not to say that we have to stop doing those things, that we have to stop looking at those histories, right, in the way conservatives often seem to suggest. What I'm saying is that those histories are really only one half of the histories that have been very important to the left. The other half are important because of the bleak role that progressives have played. Right, and so if we're going to be woke about history, then we need to be woke about all of it, right? And we just don't, again, we virtually don't see this at all. So as much as many progressives would like to say that they engage in self-scrutiny, it's very unclear to me what that is meant to look like. Again, when it comes to scrutiny of the things that the West has done, you don't need to look, it's everywhere. And again, nowhere more than on university campuses. So it's not enough just to kind of do a bit of breastfeeding, and so self-flagellation is probably the better word. It's not enough just to say, yes, well, Stalin, I guess that was bad, and yeah, Mao's Cultural Revolution, yeah, that was a mistake to support. No, I mean, if critique means actively publicizing, spreading the word, spreading the message so that people will understand what oppression is, how oppression works, how complicity in it works, then that has to happen across the board, right? I guess another way you could say this is that a lot of what progressive thought has consisted of in recent decades has been telling the untold stories, right? We hear this a lot, right? That, you go back 50 years ago, or, 60 years ago, and the ways that history was taught in schools was simply kind of stories of the glory of British civilization, of American civilization, of French civilization, what have you, and that there were all sorts of stories that were not being told. Yes, that's true. The problem is that it does no good to correct one set of untold stories and replacing it simply with just another set of untold stories. And there are still too many untold stories where the left has not always played such a glorious role either. And I think if progressives had taken more seriously the kind of self-scrutiny that they urge for all the rest of us, I think progressive thought would look much better. It would be much more honest. It would be much more subtle. It would be much more varied. It would be much more realistic if this had been done now for several decades, right? And I think many of the accusations that have been brought against progressives would not have been brought because they would have always made clear that they are subjecting themselves to the same criteria that they demand for everyone else. And that's what's gone missing.
In your book, you share an example of Jeremy Corbyn as selective memory politics. Can you share about that with our listeners and why this really is a broader issue within the leftist discourse?
Yes. Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn, of course, for it's almost seeming like ancient history, although it's really just going back a few years. Jeremy Corbyn, for a period of about 5 years, was the leader of the UK Labour Party. Right now, there's a little bit of history here. If we go back a few decades, Tony Blair really radically transformed the UK Labour Party by bringing it much more into the center ground. I think very much following someone like Bill Clinton, right? And so no more hostility to private enterprise. Tony Blair was much more sympathetic to the United States, which was always seen as a very suspicious actor on the left in those years, sort of, in much of the 20th century. And Jeremy Corbyn kind of tried to bring the UK Labour Party back to a more radical leftism of the pre-Blair era. And became a voice for kind of a more strident leftism that had been suppressed since Tony Blair, and which had abandoned the Labour Party after Tony Blair came into power. So yeah, just that little bit of background. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, again, obviously through a lot of the pro-Palestine activism, which was more prominent further to the left of the party, ended up with a lot of vocal support by people who were, in one way or another, promoting really grossly anti-Semitic messages of all sorts. And what I did in the book is this. There's a very prominent British journalist, Guardian journalist by the name of Owen Jones, again, very much engaged on the left. And I found his approach very, very interesting because many people on the left, including in the media, at this time, they were simply denying that there was any problem of anti-Semitism at all, and in fact, they were insisting that the accusations of anti-Semitism were themselves kind of a part of a Zionist or Israeli or Jewish plot. Right, so they were denying the anti-Semitism in a sense by perpetrating certain anti-Semitic myths. Owen Jones did not do this. Right, Owen Jones, and again, he's as prominent as anyone in British journalism. He said, there is this, clearly there have been many anti-Semitic events. We have to kind of confront this. But then what I found very interesting, and I mean, Jones devoted a whole chapter on this to his book, which was a kind of assessment of the Corbyn years. And what I found fascinating was that Owen Jones, like many on the left, uses the concept of systemic oppression. He uses it a lot. He uses this concept when he's talking about British colonialism, and he's talking about British racism, and he's talking about LGBTQ plus oppression. Even when he's talking about the plight of poor people in Britain. So the concept of systemic or structural oppression or discrimination is something that Jones uses a lot, and something that the people on the left use a lot. Now, I noticed that when he was talking about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, or I should say under Corbyn, right, the kind of Corbynite wing of the Labour Party, Jones was willing, and rightly so, and I applaud him for this, he was willing to kind of document a whole series of events. Really, I mean, it takes some pages to go through all of them, from the highest ranks under Corbyn just down to the foot soldiers. So he's relating one incident after another, but he keeps portraying them as accidents, as just kind of screw ups and mess ups. And Corbyn, maybe he should have done it this way instead of that way. It was almost just about kind of, crisis management and strategy. In other words, never once does Jones, or indeed anyone else who kind of broadly reflects, his kind of leftism, this kind of radical Corbynite leftism, never do they portray anti-Semitism as systemic on any part of the left. It's only just errors and accidents. Now, how can this be, right? How can this be when he's giving us such a long list, right? One, and clearly also feeding each other. It was clearly a problem, systemic anti-Semitism, and he only presents it as just mistakes, as goof-ups, right? As banana peels. And Corbyn should have done it this way instead of that way, and he waited a bit too long, and just kind of a bit of technical maneuvering. How can it be that he thinks racism and colonialism and British poverty all involve systemic oppression, and that anti-Semitism among Corbynites was only ever just a big goof up? And here's my jump off point, and then I go into kind of a few sort of progressive philosophers and social theorists, who essentially do the same thing. They don't deny the anti-Semitism that essentially would be impossible. Instead, they just keep fashioning it as just a kind of mistake, as kind of not the real leftism, right? And so we're told essentially that that the real Western liberal democracy is nothing but this long history of oppression. And again, I don't challenge that. But then how can it be that for Western liberal democracy, a history of oppression starts centuries ago and just keeps marching on, whereas anti-Semitism in on the far left, all of a sudden, either never exists at all, or it's just a couple of accidents, or if it existed, it's come to a stop, right? And so, this is one of several examples that I use to say that leftists might claim that they do self-critique and that they hold themselves to the same standards that they hold the rest of us, but they don't, and they haven't. And I think this goes a long way to explain a lot of the blind spots that I think Kamala Harris is more the victim of.
So why was Kamala Harris a victim of this type of environment?
Because the funny thing is, what was remarkable watching and following this recent American presidential election is that, all the Trump supporters kept blaming the Democrats for doing too much identity politics and not enough kitchen table issues. But if you follow what Kamala Harris and most Democrats running for high office, for Congress and everything, if you follow what they were saying, they weren't really doing that. They were focusing on kitchen table issues. Kamala Harris was doing that all the time, and she was even, boasting about this gun of hers, right? And this, and yet the reason why I think the accusation stuck on her, and this is why I'm calling her a victim, really, of progressive thought or of leftism more than anything else. I think the reason why the accusation stuck is because they have a much longer vintage. Because in a sense, again, these blind spots on the left were already big problems before Kamala Harris even went into politics, maybe even before she was born.
Well, thank you for taking the time to explain that. If there's one takeaway, one key lesson from Coming Clean that you'd like our listeners and readers to know and to think on, what would that be?
It's not enough just to speak pieties about how good the left is in scrutinizing itself. It's not enough simply to say it. You have to do it. We know what the left does. We know how the left operates when it's criticizing the things that it thinks needs criticizing. And as I say, and I'll repeat it again, I don't challenge that. I don't challenge these very important critiques of many things that have gone wrong, many of the injustices caused by Western civilization and by American civilization. But it's not enough simply to say, well, we self-scrutinize. You have to show it. We know what it looks like, and so you have to show it. You have to show that you do it. On our university campuses, for example, we have to spend as much time doing that, because certainly the left now has a decades-long history of supporting regimes that have claimed just as many innocent victims as those claimed by the worst abuses of Western civilization.
That's really something to think about as we go forward. And I found your book, Coming Clean, was such a profound read. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Well, I do try to dip in and out of social media. So I'm certainly happy to engage with anybody on LinkedIn, on Blue Sky. My web address is simply Eric Heinze in one word .com.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Coming Clean: The Rise of Critical Theory and the Future of the Left. Coming Clean is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmaryann.com for more information.